So thank you again for joining us today and participating in our session. I am very happy to say hello to all of you. It has been a while since I had done a webinar, and I'm very excited to tell you today that we have a guest speaker, Charlotte, who is joining us. I'm going to take a few minutes to introduce her very shortly. But in the meantime, I would like to just quickly go through some of the housekeeping items to make sure everybody is okay with our tools. One of the first things I have to say is there's a bit of a change to the way GoToWebinar works. So some of the screen images or some of the tools that you may have used before have changed a bit. So just a quick reminder that when you came into the session, you were able to test your sound. If you're struggling with microphone and speakers, there's an option to test them and change them if necessary. And again, reminder that if you're joining after we started, our microphone is muted. And then for the tools that you have access to as a participant, usually you will be able to see who else is attending the session. Then you can also have the audio section settings where you can mute or unmute your microphone. If it's muted by us, you will not be able to change it. But if we unmuted it for you, you should be able to mute it if necessary. And then there's a question section where you can type in questions for us, and you will see messages coming in from us. So anytime we share a link with you, they should be showing up in your question section. Additional tools you may see on your screen is the arrow, and that allows you to hide and unhide your control tools. As Charlotte was reminding me, there is in Windows, if you're using Windows environment, if you go to your view options on top of the screen, you should be able to make sure that it doesn't hide for you if you want to keep it open, or you can just use the arrow to hide it and then hide the tools, so it's better for you to see the full screen. The microphone, again, you could be muted and unmuted. You can also allow your screen to go full screen if you want to have a better view. And there is an option for you to raise a hand just to get my attention if there's something wrong, if you can't hear me or if you can't see something. But my suggestion is to use the question box. It's very likely that it will get my attention faster. And a reminder that we are recording the session today. So just a few words about me. Some of you who have come to the sessions that we organized over the last few years, you may know me, but it may be your first time coming into our webinar. My name is Monika, and I have been with AlphaPlus for well over 15 years in different positions and different roles. My current position is a digital technology and learning consultant, but I also think of myself as a coach, a trainer, a facilitator, and also as an advocate. I am a lifelong learner, so whenever I do work with different programs or organizations, and I'm asked if I know something, even if I don't, I'm very happy to learn about different tools and resources because they change so much. There's just no way to know everything. And that's how I think of myself as a lifelong learner. I also use Google Apps a lot, and I'm a big fan of the tools. I use them at home and at work. And it's one of the tools that we will be discussing today as well. And I'm going to say hello to Charlotte. And Charlotte, do you want me to introduce you, or would you like to say a few words about yourself?
Oh, I'll give you a break for a second and I'll go ahead and introduce myself.
Thank you.
So I am Charlotte, and I am the program coordinator at the Simcoe County District School Board. I am the coordinator for Literacy Essential Skills, and I'm also supporting the Youth Employment Services as well. And I am a new Google Apps user. I had to put that in there because it's just been the last year that I've been with Monika with the coaching sessions that I've learned Google Apps, and I'm loving it. I also like to think of myself as a lifelong learner, and outside of work, I am a vinyl junkie, love collecting vinyl and listening to vinyl records.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Charlotte. Oh, okay, so now for the webinar overview, just to let you know what we are going to cover today. We will talk a bit about AlphaPlus coaching services and our collaboration with Charlotte and the program that she runs. We will also discuss some of the specific needs that Charlotte had when we started working together. We will look at sample surveys that we have created, and we will show you a bit more information on how we actually set them up so you have some guidance and ideas of how you can start. We will also show you a tool called Google Shortener that allows you to create shorter links and make it easier for everybody to use them. And then finally, some of the ideas of how we can see and manage collected data that we use with the feedback from participants, and some tips on how you could use Google Forms. Again, during this session, we will be going to different slides, but if there is anything you would like us to address, specific questions, please put them into the question box. We will be pausing to answer them as we go. So very quickly about AlphaPlus coaching services and how we started working with Charlotte. As some of you may know, AlphaPlus offers customized support and coaching services where we work with specific organizations to address their specific technology needs. Each year, we have a pre-selected number of sites that we work with. This year, it's 19 agencies. And our engagements can be short or long-term, depending on the needs of the organization. And we look at the fiscal year. So we start in April and go until March if necessary, but sometimes those engagements can be a bit shorter. Our job is to provide a bit of advice, ideas, examples, and hopefully to inspire our programs to use technology and use them sometimes many in a different way than they're meant to as well. So we will want to show you some of the ideas or at least discuss them as well. We do some PD training with organizations, so if necessary, we can go out and provide training on site, or we can do it online as well. Some of you may know that our organization is fairly small. We have 3.5 staff members, and when I say a half, that's because we have a part-time person who is working for us, and each of us has 5 to 6 sites to work with, depending on our workload and hours, of course. Now, when it comes to reviewing the information, and what we do is we work with organizations, but by looking at their needs and what they may be interested in. And based on that information, we will develop a work plan to address some of the needs and ideas. And we really focus on technology integration, but not only on the tools. We look at teaching and learning, we look at administration, referrals, and we do believe that many of the tools we discuss or use are really impacting or could be used in many, many different ways. And they will cross the scope of some of those different areas that we are discussing. And it was a pleasure for me to work with Charlotte in the last fiscal year. So we were working April 2016 to March 2017. We are still connecting a lot and doing many things together, which is just fantastic. So I'm going to turn it over to Charlotte, maybe just to share a bit more information about Charlotte's program and maybe specific needs that she was looking to address. Charlotte?
Okay, thanks. So as you can see here, there's quite a few different things, and as we started working together, other things came about that I didn't even realize I needed. So we do have several sites and located in different areas in Simcoe County. A large number of learners. For us, a large number is close to 700. I know there are some who think that's a small number, and others will realize that's large. So we were really looking for some different tools that we could use to really make our team a little closer, our practitioner team, but also figure out some ways to collaborate our resources and whatever else we could possibly do using technology. Another one was, trying to connect more online, because we just weren't getting to see each other enough. I was doing a lot of traveling back and forth and seeing practitioners one-on-one, but that really wasn't working well. And for us to have a team meeting, it would mean having to cancel classes, and we were really trying to figure out how to make that work. And also reducing paperwork. Who doesn't want to reduce paperwork? We're trying to figure out ways to do that. And also, I think really encouraging students to use technology more came out of some of our conversations, and how we could easily do that, more easily than I realized that we could, I think, is how that came about. And again, we gather feedback from our students. We used to gather feedback through a paper form, and we'll get into how we do it now.
Perfect. So when it comes to using Google Forms, Charlotte, do you want me to cover that part of why we chose Google Forms?
Sure. Okay.
So we chose Google Forms because Charlotte's needs were to look for information, and one of the main goals was to look at satisfaction surveys. And I am a big fan of Google applications, as I mentioned earlier. So that, for me, that was immediately the first reaction when Charlotte talked about gathering information and feedback. So I was like, yay, let's try Google Forms. And some of the reasons why that tool may be useful for you as well is that it is part of a Gmail account. And SCDSB, the organization that Charlotte works for, has a Google for Education. So she automatically already had a Gmail account that she was able to connect to and log in very quickly, which also meant that she automatically had a Google Forms as part of the apps she had access to. So one login and quick access was very important for us. In Google Forms, you can ask different types of questions, multiple choice, a selection of questions. You can add text and grids and all kinds of different things like that, which makes Google Forms a very useful tool to use. You can also add sections to break the length of the surveys. So if you do want to have 20 questions, your students don't have to scroll down through 20 questions. You can actually have multiple pages so they can go one question at a time, and it makes it a bit easier for them visually. You can include images, videos, dates, times, and fields, all kinds of information like that. Plus, you can create conditional questions. So conditional questions will be types of questions where, depending on the answer, the learner may jump or student may jump from one section to another, skipping a number of questions because they wouldn't be applicable to them. You can also rate responses if necessary. So if you're thinking of doing potentially assessments or tests or quizzes, it has that option built in. It's easy to share. You can send it by email, you can share it by a link, or even embed on your website. It's fairly easy to collaborate on your survey with others, which means you can invite your colleagues to access the survey and work with you on building it and making it better. And responses can be automatically saved. And they're saved in 3 different ways. They are put together as individual responses. They are put together as a summary of responses. Plus, you can also choose to save them to a Google Sheet, which is like an Excel spreadsheet. And even with that, you can choose that for each survey you have, the responses go to a separate new responses sheet, or you can take different surveys and feed the information from them into one document if you want to as well. So many, many different options in how the tool can be used. So there's a quick poll that I hope I can do with you. If you give me 1 second, I'm going to see if I can launch a poll right in our form here. So the very first one is going to pop up very quickly on your screen, and it's going to ask you if you have a Gmail account. So what you have to do, you just quickly answer the questions and let us know if you have a Gmail account or not, because that will tell us if you actually have access to Google Forms. Okay, just a few more answers, and I want to make sure that everybody has a chance to do it. Okay, I'm going to count to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, let's close the poll, and I'm going to share with you the results because this is the fun part. Check it out. 100% of you have a Gmail account, which means you all have access to Google Forms. Fantastic. So I'm going to hide that, and I'm going to ask you just one more question. And the question is, do you use Google Forms? So that question will be very interesting because we probably will be getting different feedback from you, and we are very curious to see how and if you're using the forms. So just a few more minutes. Okay. Countdown. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. I'm going to close the poll, and I'm going to share the results again. 9% of you are using Google Forms. 18% yes, but only a bit, and 73% of you are not using Google Forms. So this is exciting because I think we can show you some of the ideas and suggestions that you may actually start using Google Forms for different purposes. The one we are showing today is just one of the examples, but there are many different ways you can use Google Forms. So thank you for participating in our poll. Now you will see on the screen, I have another poll, and I'm not going to launch it for you, but if you ever want to go and see this later on, we did create the same poll or the questions that you may have in the poll that I was just launching. It could be created as a Google form as well. So I'm just going to very quickly click on it and show you. Hopefully it's going to launch on your screen. Charlotte, can you confirm with me that you can see the poll?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, perfect. So I was using the tools in GoToWebinar to ask you some of the questions, but I also could have sent you this link and asked you to fill out this survey. It will just have taken a bit longer for me because I will have to go and see the results in a different screen. But that's some of the tools and examples we will be using and sharing with you today, where I could just send you a link to a survey and then you can fill it out and provide the feedback. In the Google form, there's 3 questions. The ones I launched with you today were only 2. One of the reasons for that is because Google GoToWebinar doesn't actually allow polls where you can type in the answers. It can only be yes or no questions, multiple choice questions. Where in Google Forms, for example, I could ask you, how do you use them, and ask you to provide the feedback in a text box. So instead of doing that, what I'm going to ask you is to take a few minutes and in your question box, type in, if you are using Google Forms, I know there was a small number of you, but if you're using Google Forms, how do you use them? Let's just take a few minutes to see if some of you would like to share that information with us. So in your question box, please share the information with us. Of course, my slides went to the wrong page, but that's okay. Okay, we don't have any volunteers. Nobody's typing anything yet. That's okay. I know it's hard sometimes to participate and it's not the right time of the day. So we have one feedback from Karen Bosworth. Thank you, Karen, for that. I don't use Google Forms, but I use SurveyMonkey to create event feedback forms. That's perfect. That's another tool that will be very useful. You will see at the end of today's session, we do use SurveyMonkey as well, and we use that for our feedback on the webinars. And then I have David Rosen. Thank you for sharing with us. You're using it to set up meetings with colleagues. Wow, that's a different way to use it, but that's fantastic to know. Tanya is sharing that you're starting to use it for board orientation. That's really good. And transitioning from SurveyMonkey to Google Forms. So thank you for that. That's really good to know and see. You don't have to pick one tool. You can always use a different scope of tools. So it's really good to see that some of you are trying different ways to use the tools as well. For us, we have been using SurveyMonkey for many years now. So as we continue the Tech Tuesdays, we have a way to basically manage and compare the data. So we continue using SurveyMonkey, but very often for many different purposes, we would use Google Forms as well. And you may have seen some of them. If you work with us, when we are working with different programs, we may have sent you some feedback forms or orientation forms or intake forms that we have used Google Forms for that as well. So thank you for all this feedback that you were able to share with us. And I'm going to move on and share with you a few sample surveys that we have created. Just a very quick overview of that, a few screen captures, and then we are going to go to the live surveys. And I'm going to hand it over soon to Charlotte to talk a bit more about them. So what the first one that we are quickly sharing with you is Skills Upgrading Satisfaction Survey. And when you're looking at the screen capture here, this is a student view. So the student would just follow a link and access the information. And I want to highlight that if you would like access to those forms, maybe copy them or adapt them to your needs, we will be very happy to share them. Charlotte was kind enough to say that, of course, we can do that. So just contact me or Charlotte. Our contact information will be at the end of the slides, and we will be happy to share the content with you as well. But this is the sort of student view where the students will go in and fill out the information. And this is the editing view. So this is how it will look for us if we are actually creating the survey, where you see all the different buttons and options that we can access. So it's a bit more fluid, and there are many more tools for us to use when we are actually managing the survey. And the second survey we will be sharing with you is a Computers for Work feedback survey. Again, student view, fairly simplified with the logo and the questions. And then more comprehensive administrator view where you have all the tools and information as well. So Charlotte, I'm going to launch one of the surveys, and would you like to talk about them?
Sure.
Perfect. Which one would you like me to start with?
You can start with the LES skills upgrading.
Okay, so I'm going to go into the survey. And because we are the administrators, and I do have the permission from Charlotte and have access to the survey from the administrator side, that's why we can see all the tools that we can use. And we'll go over some of them fairly briefly. But I'm going to switch to the student view, so I can go to preview. And the student view will be sort of cleaner, streamlined page showing how the survey actually looks live. So Charlotte, can I hand it over to you to tell us more about how do you want to use this tool, or how are you using this tool?
Sure. So the one thing that I really, really like about this tool is that it is very simple. It's like the SurveyMonkey in the sense that really all you have to do is be able to scroll and click, basically. and obviously read the questions. But so for us, what we were doing before, like I mentioned, was the paper survey, and then we would get all the responses, and then I would have to have somebody manually basically take all those responses, type it into a spreadsheet so that I could get them all at once instead of getting them from all of our different sites. So we've set this up so that it's one link. It's a very easy link for the students or the learners to go to, and then they just answer these questions. So we set it up. This is one of those conditional questions. What learning center do you work with, or did you work with? When they type in or click on Barry, it'll now go to who were you working with in Barry. So all of the other questions that are in there, they don't need to see at all. So if it was Joanne, then they could pick, and if it wasn't one of these facilitators or instructors, then they could type in who it was. And I can easily update this whenever I get a new instructor or somebody I know is not working in there. It's so easy to go in and just change the name or take somebody out. And then I've added a few questions here that are similar to the exit form for LBS, but it was information that I thought would be really nice to gather, and is still quick for them to fill it in. So just wondering, why they were leaving. So that's one of the questions. And again, this is just your basic click one, and actually you can see that there's a star and it's a required question. So if somebody tries to skip that question, they will have to click on something. It won't just skip that question. So again, same thing. What are they doing now? I know it's similar to what we asked on the exit form. But it's also, it's an easier way for me to gather this information than it would be to go into CAMS and try to get it. And it's also live. I get it right away. I don't have to wait for a report from CAMS if I want to find out some of this outcome information.
And just to add to that, you will notice that the questions, there was just only 1 or 2 questions per page, and that's because we have decided to use the sections. So it's a bit easier for the student to focus and concentrate on the questions as well.
And less scrolling.
Absolutely.
There's little to no scrolling that was involved. So then we used a short answer question so that they can type in, what really worked for them, and then also, any recommendations that they may have. And these are questions that are not asked in the exit form through MAISD. So it's extra. It's not something that we're required to do, but it is something that really helps us, our program. And one of the things that I was a little bit concerned about at first was that, what if a learner really can't do this online and they need the support? But really anybody that's going to come into our program is going to be using the computer eventually. They're going to learn it, and this is the really basic computer skills involved here. And when we do this learner feedback survey, we try to do it before they've left us completely, so that then if they do need some support, the instructor is right there, or another student that can help them if they really need that help still. But usually by the time they're leaving our program, hopefully if they've stayed long enough to do the feedback survey, they do have some of those computer skills. And then the other thing about doing it this way is it truly is an anonymous survey. They don't have to put their name on here if they don't want to. And when we were doing it before, it was a paper survey, so they could just, basically they're handing it back to their instructor. You could do it anonymously and have everyone put it in an envelope so nobody would know whose it was, but it's still pretty, it's right there. So it didn't seem to be quite so anonymous. So this way they can come into this survey and nobody's going to know who they were. So if they do have some comments, they might feel a little more open to share them. And I don't know, I'm sure some of you have been to some of Sarah Delicate's workshops, and that's one of the things I always get a kick out of when she describes how our surveys are. You're basically handing over this paper, so do you like me? Did I do a good job? And this way you're really getting hopefully some more true and honest feedback. Not that there's anything negative in our program, but it's always good to have that feedback anonymously too.
There's a question from Karen who is asking, if they choose yes to contact them, is there a way to keep their answers anonymous? And just to answer that question, right now, this way the survey is built, the answer they will provide. So if they select that yes, they would like to be contacted and go to the next section, that's when they can provide their email address. So it is part of the same survey. It will be in their responses. But when you're building the survey, and if you want to separate that information, you could connect two surveys together. So the contact information can go into a different survey, and it's not tied back to this one. So there is a way to build it in where even though they want to be contacted, you will not know what information they provide in the feedback survey. So in this case, Charlotte was okay, and the students are okay with combining them, but there is a way to do both. Sorry, Charlotte.
And actually, yeah, that's a really, really good question. And that's something that we may end up building into this one.
Mm-hmm.
If anybody, has an issue with it, but that's definitely a true way to make sure it's anonymous.
And then we will hit submit, and that's it. There are different options that you can set up when you do the feedback surveys or any surveys when it comes to Google Forms. For example, there's an option to enable editing of the response. So if their learner did the survey, but then they remember they did something wrong, or they may want to provide extra information, they can go back and edit that response by clicking to edit your response button. And another one is submit another response, which is another feature that can be enabled. And that always is very useful if you have a computer lab or only a few computers and multiple learners filling out the surveys. So that allows them to basically switch, and then another person can come in and do the survey as well. Just so you know that those are the options that you can enable.
Okay. And since you can enable them, you can also disable them so that you can't do that.
Exactly.
And in some cases, depending on what your survey is or what you're doing, you don't want them to go back and edit or submit another response. So
absolutely.
Really good options.
So if we go back to the other surveys, would you like to cover the other one, or would you like to see the responses?
I think we should probably go to responses, because the other one really is basically the same survey.
Okay.
It's a different link, but it's really, if anyone did our computers for work workshops, then they would fill in that survey instead of the LES survey. Or if they did both, they may end up doing both surveys. So the questions are basically very similar questions. So as you can see here in the responses, it's basically, it looks like an Excel spreadsheet. This one is the Google Sheets, and it shows you each question. I can then sort it by center if I want to. I can sort it by instructor if I prefer. I can also look very quickly and see what some of the comments might be, and if there's anything I need to address right away, I can just scroll through really quickly to find out. Or if somebody does want me to contact them, then I can do that. Now, I could have it set up so that every time there's a response, I would get a notification. However, I really do not want that many notifications once we start really doing more and more exits or surveys. But I just need to know that I need to go in here every, I pick a time and put it in my calendar and say, okay, just go have a quick peek and see through the surveys, especially at this time of year for us being a school board. A lot of our learners are exiting the program right now. And I know I just got a whole bunch of responses in this morning, and many of them said the reason they're leaving is we don't have classes for the summer. So that was an option, no summer classes, and that they'll be coming back in the fall. So.
And there's a few things just to add and clarify to what Charlotte was saying. She just mentioned that Charlotte got a few more responses this week. We have a copy of the survey that Charlotte set up. So that's why no new responses are coming into this one, because it's just a copy of what she had used. Her live form is still live. She's still accepting responses, but we didn't want to share that information with you. So we are just sharing a copy of something that we have done before. So that's why no updates. And Charlotte mentioned that she can set up notifications. So if you're in the Google Sheets, this is the tool Google Sheets, part of the Google applications, you can go in and set up notification rules. And that's what Charlotte was referring to, where you can be notified anytime there's a change in the sheet. So anytime a new form is filled out, there's a notification for Charlotte, and she can get them right away as a email every time somebody fills it out, or she can get them as a daily digest. So if there's multiple responses, she will just get the message once a day. So that's the options that are also available to you if you want to get those notifications. Anything else we should add, Charlotte?
Just one, it's just a quick thing, but in this Google Sheet, it's very similar to Excel, and you can do text wrapping. So you can see right now, if you were to scroll across and try to read the answers, if somebody actually put some comments in there, you're not going to be able to read them very well. But if you just do text wrapping, which I forgot to do for this one, it just makes it that much easier to read. So it's a small thing, but it makes a difference when you're trying to read comments.
Absolutely. And then, yes, if you go to format, you can apply the text formatting to all the cells, and it will be a bit easier to read. We do have a question about the timestamp. And yes, there is a timestamp. So usually the very first column will be the timestamp when the survey was filled out. Again, it didn't take the one I did today because it's just a copy of a document that we did a bit before. But my information was also recorded somewhere, and I'll take you later to show you where. Okay, so perfect. So that's really good. So any other questions? Again, have them coming. We will be answering them as we go. Those are very, very good questions, and we want to answer them so that you are comfortable with the tool as we are continuing working with that. Should we go to the next one, the Computer for Work survey?
Sure. Like I said, it really is basically, it's the same survey, same idea, and we just asked very similar questions. So it was really easy to create it because I basically copy and paste. And then I actually have a third one that we use for our soft skills solutions when we run that modular class. So if we decide to run a different type of session, really all I have to do is just change a few words in the survey, and I've got a new survey.
Yep.
And it just makes it a little bit more personal for the student, if we give it the name of the program they actually attended. So
absolutely. And then just to add to that, if you look at the tools on top of the page where we have the send button, next to it are 3 dots for more, and that's where you can come in and just make a copy of it, and the system will make a copy of the entire survey. It will not copy the responses, just the actual questions, and then you can go in and change them as necessary. Okay. So let's go back into the slides just to make sure that we can give you a bit more information on what we can do. I did include a bit of information about navigating and using Google Forms, and that's keeping in mind some of you may not have used Google Forms before, so I want to give you a bit of tips and ideas as well. So when we finish the session, you should be able to use the slides even as a bit of a navigation or a way to start off as well. I'm just going to very quickly go through them. You will be able to repurpose the slides as well. For example, getting to Google Forms, if you have a Gmail account, and all of you said you have Gmail accounts. So there's 2 ways to do it. When you're logged into your Gmail account, in the top right corner where you have your profile for administrator or for the user of the account, next to it you will see 9 tiny squares, and that's called Google Apps. When you click on that, it will give you a list of some of the mostly used applications, and between them should be Google Forms. Usually that order is not always the same, so it may not be second for you. It may be 10th or 12th item, or you may have to click more to see it, but you do have access to forms, and that's one of the ways to get to it. Another quick way to do it is to basically, when you're in your Gmail account, go to your browser, and in the browser type in forms.google.com, and it will take you to your forms as well. So 2 very quick ways to get in and access the forms. As soon as you will get into your forms, you will have an option to create a blank form or to choose from templates. So if you're new to Google Forms and you're trying to see how you could use them or how you could sort of set them up, Google provides you templates that you may want to start with, and it will have different questions already preset. It will have the theme preset for you, and you can start with that. If you click on the blank form, you will be taken to Untitled form. There's nothing there. You're starting from scratch. There's even no title for you. That's where you can come in and type in the title and start creating the questions. Very quick overview of the questions is that for the question types, you have many different choices. So you can say, how was your day? And it could be multiple choice where you say great or really bad, or it could be short answers, it could be paragraphs, it could be checkboxes, drop-down options, scales and grids if you want to make it a bit more complicated, even an option to put date and time. So when somebody is filling out the survey, you could ask them, what's today's date? And then they could just select from an option that's already preset for them in the form. So all kinds of different types of questions you can ask. You can also add different pieces or content to it. So you can create additional questions. You can add titles and descriptions to break down your forms into different sections. You can add images. You can add videos. So a very good example could be you can have learners watch a video, write in Google Form, and then answer questions related to that video. And then you can also add sections. And that's how we broke down the survey that Charlotte was sharing with us to have just a few questions per page, so it's a bit easier to navigate. Now, if you also look at the bottom of the page, so every time you create a question, you will have a question, type of question, options, and then at the bottom, there will be a few extra tools. One of them will be to copy or duplicate the question, so you don't have to redo it every time. Another one will be to delete it, to set it as a required question. So that's when Charlotte was saying we have the red asterisk to make the question required. So the participant filling out the survey cannot continue until they answer the question, and the system will remind them to answer the question. And then there is another option that I want to show you, which is the three tiny dots. And those dots have more options where you can also go into a section based on an answer. So if you enable that, that's where you can set up conditional questions. We have found over the years with Google products that you can have 5 people log into the account, and each of them may have a slightly different way of the way things look. So when I started working with Charlotte and she was showing me the form that she was working on, she already had the conditional questions there. It was very easy for her to do it. On my Google form, it wasn't showing, and we couldn't figure out why. And only later we realized that I actually had to go in and enable it using those 3 dots and select, put a check mark basically, go to section based on answer, and that allowed me to create conditional questions. So if you're looking for that, that's where you will need to go to be able to set it up if you don't see it in the form. And finally, the tools that you will see on top, there's different settings, again, you can work with. You could do different colors, you can do previews, you could do settings, and then you can send it to somebody, and then more. And in the more sections, that's where you can go in and duplicate the form or add your collaborators if you want to work with somebody on it. Basically, you invite somebody else to have editing rights and come in and make changes to it. Now, when it comes to sharing, this was a very interesting way we worked with Google Forms, and it's something for you to be aware of as well. When you click on send, because you're trying to send the form to potentially your students or learners, you can share that form in many different ways. You can send it via an email, and usually that will be an option right when you click on send form. You can click on an email and add the email address or addresses, and the Google form will be sent through email. If it's a short form, it will show up and display right in the email. So the learner or student doesn't even have to go away from the email. Right in the email, they can answer the questions and hit submit. If you're using a Google form where you have sections, like the one that Charlotte showed us today, then Google will not display it in Gmail. It's just because it's broken down into sections, so it will take you out to the actual form to fill it out. Not a problem, but something to be aware of if you're looking at that difficulty. But our issue was that we wanted to share the link with the students and the instructors. And if you notice our screen capture, when we go to send and we say, okay, we want to share it by a link, the address is extremely long. Can you imagine having a student trying to retype this so they can fill out the survey? That was just horrible. And then Google provides you an option saying, oh, you can make the link a bit shorter. So when you select that, it will make the link shorter, but it is not much shorter. It is still kind of a lot of different characters and numbers and different things, a lot of possibilities to make mistakes. So we really didn't like that. And Google Shortener is a tool that we decided to use instead. So make sure that you don't select shorten URL. Actually, you stick to the full address. So you will copy this full address into your clipart. So just click copy on it. And then you will go to goo.gl, which is a website address where you can shorten your links. You paste the long link into that address and click shorten URL, and the system comes back with a much, much shorter version of the address. And if I take this address and type it into the browser, it will come up and open the form for me. So it is a much easier way to share the link, potentially in situations where you want learners to even type it on their computer, because goo.gl is fairly easy. Everybody can type it. And then you have 6 characters that they just have to type in. So it's much easier and less chances of making a mistake. However, I just want to highlight something to you. This is based on our learning experience, and I go out to different events and organizations, and we try to provide the links to make things easier. We have learned that sometimes the characters that are included in that address can be still confusing. So for example, here is a link that we put in, and we have a 0 and we have an L. But for somebody who is trying to retype this, they will be asking, is this an O or a 0? So you have to be very clear. The next one is an L, or is it a capital L or lowercase l, or is it capital I? What is it? So in some situations, those letters can still be confusing. And so what we suggest is that when you go and create the short link, check the characters. If you have zeros or L's, run the code again and try to get a code that cannot be confusing for anyone. So it's very clear and very easy to retype. Now I'm going to stop just for 1 second because Tammy is telling me I'm in my Gmail and I don't see a Forms app, even after clicking on more. So Tammy, my suggestion would be just to click forms.google.com, and that should take you to your Forms option. And if it doesn't, you may have to go even into more options in the 9 squares. If you go in, there's a full list of all the apps that Google provides, and you will find Forms there. I hope that helps. And let's move on. So a few lessons about how we do sharing and what we do. Charlotte, can I pass it on to you so that you can discuss that section?
Sure. So we definitely learned a few things. I learned a few things as we were going. And one, it's kind of a funny thing that happened was we got the survey together. It was all ready to go. And I did a whole PD session with the practitioners, showed them the survey, showed them what I did, and then I was going to share it with them in their in a Google Drive, and have them copy it into their Google Drive so that they would have the links and they could give it to their students. So we did that PD session, and then we didn't get it copied over right away, and then a few weeks went by, and then all of a sudden everybody kind of forgot what to do, and we're supposed to copy and rename, and then it went on for another 2 months before I got around to saying, okay, we really need to get this survey up and running, it's ready to go. And then Monika and I had one conversation, and we came to realize, or I came to realize, that the instructors didn't even need to know anything about Google Forms. They didn't need to know Google Drive. They didn't need anything but that short link to give to their learners. They didn't have to copy anything. They needed nothing but that link. So the next day I was able to just send them the link and say, give this to your learners when you're doing the feedback survey, and away we went. So I had this I guess fear or whatever, that I can't launch this yet until everybody knows how to use Google Forms and everybody's comfortable with it. And then I realized they don't at all. They don't. Your practitioners or your instructors or you as the person administering the survey do not need to know anything about Google Forms. You just need the link. It opens it up. The student doesn't have to know Google Forms. They don't have to have a Gmail account. It's just a website basically you go to, do the survey, and it's done. So that to me was just brilliant. And then the other one was, so it's along the same lines here, is that only the person that's going to be making any changes to the content of the survey, the form, really needs to even know about the Google Forms. I mean, it's nice to know. I'm not saying not to do the training, but it's not a need to know. So it doesn't take a whole lot to put this into place if staff doesn't have all of that training or know how to use Google Forms or even have access to it. And then, so again, based on that, because we have the 3 surveys, I just created one very simple document that named the surveys, and then here's the link, survey, here's the link. So then that instructor could decide to give that document to their students. So they just had to click on the link and open it, or they just put it up on the board and say, please go to this link and do the survey. So there were 2 options then that they could use in order to use the survey. So really quick, easy way to use this technology.
Thank you, Charlotte.
And
Perfect. We did include a sample of instructions that you could use, and that we'll get a bit later also to responses. So I'm going to keep that for later. But there is a choice where you could share the form with the instructors, but also the responses. And in this case, in these examples, we are showing you don't have to, because Charlotte can just keep the responses to herself, or Charlotte can choose to share the responses with the instructors as well. Okay, so let's move on to another slide. Because one of the ways you may be interested in is, what do we do with all this data? How do we get the data and how do we collect the data? Very briefly, when we were looking at some of the responses from Charlotte's survey, we went to the Excel spreadsheet or Google Sheets way of looking at the responses. But there are three different ways to look at them. When you are in your survey, so if I go back to, this is the public view, this is the editing view. If I go back to the survey and I'm in the administrator mode, I have all the tools that I can see. You can see that in the question section, we can build the survey with all the questions that we want to add, but there's a tab for responses. So if there was no responses, there will be nothing there, but there's right now one response, and that's the one I filled out today. And what the system will do, it will give me information in two different ways. There will be a summary of responses. Right now, there's only one, but if there was more, it will actually summarize all the responses and give me graphics with information and breakdowns of what the responses were. And then if I wanted to see individual responses, I can click on individual responses and go through the question and see all the selections that were made when that participant was filling out the survey. If there were more responses, I could navigate between the responses using the arrows. I could print the responses. I could also delete the response if I want to. It's possible to remove the responses or stop accepting the responses. So Charlotte may say, okay, by September, we will not be using the survey anymore, so that somebody doesn't go in and accidentally fill out the survey that's already closed, for example. So you can turn off the form and say, this form doesn't accept responses anymore. And as you're looking at this, there's this green box right here. If I click on it, I can say create a spreadsheet, and it's going to ask me, okay, how do you want to collect the responses? Do you want to create a new spreadsheet? And this is a proposed name. So in the name, it will take the name of the full survey. And I'm going to move to the side because it's going to be a bit long, and add the bracket with responses in it. And that will tell you when you're looking at the documents, you will know that this is the responses to this specific survey. Or I can click on select an existing spreadsheet. And if I had another survey that I wanted to combine the responses into one document, I could select that and continue through the steps, find the spreadsheet that already exists, select it, and the system will be adding responses to that other spreadsheet. What it will do, just to clarify, is it will not combine all the responses into one table. It will create tabs and separate sheets for each form. So when you'll be looking at the spreadsheet, at the bottom, you will have potentially survey 1, survey 2, survey 3, and responses for each survey will be in a separate tab. But it's still going to be one document, which may be easier for you to review the data if you want to. So two choices to collect the responses.
And I'll just add something there, Monika, to
absolutely.
that. So in the survey that we have currently, we're asking the question, what learning center did you work with? If we wanted to take that question out of there altogether, we could have a different link for each learning center and then have the responses go to the one spreadsheet with the tabs. So then I wouldn't have to do any sorting. I would just be able to look at the tab itself and see, I could go to the Berry tab or the Alliston tab to look at those responses, and it would save them from asking this question. However, currently I like it the way it is because everything's all on one worksheet, and it's all together, so I can just look at all the responses, and I'm really not all that concerned currently with looking at each center separately, and again, I could sort it that way. So just something to think about on different ways to use it.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to pause and answer a question. So Tammy is asking us, why is this better or the same as SurveyMonkey? And Tammy hasn't used SurveyMonkey before. Both tools allow you to create forms and surveys. Google Forms, from the visual perspective, is simpler and easier to create. SurveyMonkey has a lot of options, which is also a fantastic tool, great reporting options, great analysis option. But if you're looking for something basic and simple, it can get a bit overwhelming. And on top of that, you have to log into it to be able to access it every time because it's a separate platform. One of the nice benefits of the Google form is the fact that it's part of your Gmail account, so it's easy for you to access all the information without having to log in and out into the account. I hope that answers and helps with your question, but if not, please send more. We'll try to answer as many as possible. Thank you, Charlotte, for that feedback as well. So I'm just going to jump through a few slides on our presentation slides, because we did cover that in the preview mode when we went to the live site, but you do have that information also in the slides in case you want to access that information as well. So to summarize the responses, easy to access and review because it's kind of built into the survey itself, or you can also have the spreadsheet if you want to. The information can be sorted based on site location. The way Charlotte was mentioning, she can actually sort the information. What we didn't show, but I want to add, is that because it's a spreadsheet, you can actually add additional columns that are not part of the survey. So for example, when you have students filling out the forms, on the side in the spreadsheet, you can add notes for yourself. So for example, you can say add it to the system, or saved as a copy, or put a copy in the learner file. You can add those notes in the spreadsheet and they will not affect your form in any way. It's all automatic, so it saves hours of entering the data from paper copies, as Charlotte mentioned. Can be set up to be anonymous, but it doesn't have to be, so just keep that in mind. There could be many surveys or feedback forms that you can create where you could ask the students for the name, and that can help you address some of the issues that they may be raising as well. So it's totally up to you in how you structure that survey. And information can be collected into separate spreadsheets or combined into specific one document. So a lot of different possibilities in the way it works. Again, going back to the SurveyMonkey is a fantastic tool, has great reporting options, but sometimes when you're starting off with surveys, it can be a bit overwhelming. And they did just go through a redesign. I was looking at the SurveyMonkey just to create a survey for this webinar, and it looks different again from what it looked like just a few months ago. So another relearning activity for me to do that, and for everybody else as well. Many more options, which can be a bit confusing.
And I'll just add something. I'm not sure if this is still the case or not, but SurveyMonkey, from what I understand, has limited number of questions and a limited number of, I think, access unless you pay for it. And which I don't think it's very expensive, and if you pay for it, then you get more options to use. Whereas this one, it's basically unlimited. And like I said, it really is just a preference.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Like survey forums, yeah.
Absolutely. So
for us, it was good to use forums just because I really wanted to learn all of the Google apps. So I wanted to use the forms and use the spreadsheets and use the quizzes and everything I could possibly use to make sure I learned it.
Thank you, Charlotte. And I'm going to switch to the lessons learned, some of the things that you were highlighting as things you have learned. So you mentioned earlier, no need to train staff, but provide a link and quick instructions. Can I have you go over the other items that you highlighted as lessons learned?
Sure. So one of the things that came out in our PD session, the first one, was the instructors wanted to know if they would have access to the responses. And I said, sure. And then there was really a lot of discussion in the room about whether or not we should allow that. So, should all instructors be able to see the responses from learners, from another instructor? So somebody, the instructor in Aurelia may not necessarily want the instructor in Barrie to be able to see all of the responses of her learners. So I thought that was an interesting discussion and something I hadn't really thought too much about. So as it is now, I have set it up so that I'm the only one that sees the responses as the coordinator. However, what I will likely do is sort it by instructor and then just send them their section of the responses, because I think it's really nice too for them to get that good feedback. If they don't get to see the responses at all ever, they're not going to know all the wonderful things that have been said about them and some of the things that people recommend for improvement. So that was just something to think about, and to who is going to have access to those responses. And so always test it with colleagues and staff first. Definitely we found a lot of things that I wouldn't have even noticed if it wasn't somebody else testing it out first. Just the usability of it, and I because I was playing part in the creation of it, it just seemed natural and normal to me until somebody said, oh, well, you know, this scrolls here when it would be easier if it was 2 sections and those kinds of things. So that really made a big difference. Oh yes, so switching from paper to online brings in some change. It definitely brought change to our program. Sometimes some resistance, but I think the resistance that we found were just some of those things like I mentioned about the responses, and just thinking that they really needed to understand the whole Google form and everything. And once we realized that they didn't need to know that, it was great. Off you go. And they're finding it's actually easier to use so far. Now, it's still new. I don't have a whole lot of data to present, but so far, so good. And oh, and I think I mentioned this earlier too, that if a learner doesn't have the access or even know how to use the technology or not comfortable with using the computer survey, we still do have the paper surveys on hand. They're more than welcome to use the paper survey and fill that one out, so we still get our information.
Absolutely.
And absolutely takes some time to implement the new system and processes, and again, it's back to the lifelong learning. We're always learning about how to improve and how to change things quickly if need be. And that's one of the things I really like about the Google Forms, is it is quick, and you don't have to worry about saving it here and making sure you update it over here. When you have it on your Google Drive, as soon as you update it, it goes live and it's updated everywhere that it needs to be. So that's the other thing I like about this one.
Fantastic.
And if I could, you ask me in a year from now, I'll have a whole bunch more lessons learned.
And we are providing you contact information if somebody wants to contact you about that too.
Absolutely.
If I could just quickly add to the responses, the bullet number 2, I think one of the options also is to structure the feedback in a different way, because right now you have one form and learners choose the location within the form. But you could, if you wanted to, set up separate forms for each location. And that way, right, the feedback will be based on the location only. So it wouldn't combine different locations and information that way, which may affect how easy it is for you to share the responses with the instructors too.
Right. Okay. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's lessons, right? So we are learning which way is working for you, which way is working for the instructors as well.
Right.
So I'm going to include, we included in the slides 10 tips for creating meaningful surveys. There's a link on that page that will take you to a really, really good article about what to do and what not to do when you're creating surveys. Some of the tips are very, very good. I really like the one when you say ask direct questions, because sometimes we can structure the questions to be so confusing that somebody doesn't know the answers. But I will let you follow the link later on and explore it on your own. We did include a few resources for you, not too many, because really we would like you to try it out, so we don't want to overwhelm you. But Google has a lot of great tips and resources and support to help you set up different forms and learn how they work. So 3 links for you to explore if you ever want that information. Of course, those slides will be shared with you as a follow-up email, so you will have access to all this information, including the links. And I'm going to thank you for participating today. Thank you, Charlotte, so much for taking the time to be with us to share your feedback and suggestions. I am going to copy the link for our survey so that you can actually let us know how you feel about today's session. And also you will see on the slide right here that the information about the Tech Tuesdays, that we are actually not going to have Tech Tuesdays over the summer. We will be coming back in September, and we will have many new topics and webinars for you to explore. So the thank you page has information with Charlotte's email address, with my email address. Feel free to contact any of us with questions and information. In your question box, you should see a link to feedback survey, which is a survey monkey, where you can fill out the feedback on today's topic. I did not do it on Google Forms. I would like to. But again, as I mentioned, because we have ongoing webinars every month, and we have done them for a while, all of our information has been collected in SurveyMonkey over the last probably 4 or 5 years. So we didn't want to navigate away from collecting information about Tech Tuesdays that way. But other ways to use Google Forms, there are so many different options. And as a very interesting thing I want to mention is that I was just reading an article where a teacher used Google Forms to create math stories with text and paragraphs and decision processes for learners to use. So, for example, they will read a part of a paragraph and then they have to choose yes or no or maybe, or they will have to choose a specific answer. And the teacher built in conditional questions. So depending on what the learners chose, they would be taken to a different section of the story and continue the story. So Google Forms could be used even for stories. It doesn't have to be only for feedback forms or assessments, but also for stories. So I thought it was a very neat idea to use a tool, Google Forms, for that purpose. Any feedback, any questions, any suggestions, please use the question box. This is the great time to do it. We're just going to be a few more minutes. I know it's 4 o'clock, so you probably want to go. I really encourage you to fill out the survey and let us know how you feel about today. We will include that link afterwards just in case if you don't have time right now. But please, please provide us with the feedback because it makes a difference for us in how we can change or structure our webinars and make them better. So once again, thank you so much, Charlotte, for being with us. Thank you to all of you for taking the time to come and to ask questions and participate. Really appreciate it. A few more minutes before we wrap up. Thank you so much. So I'm going to keep the questions open just in case there's anything you would like to ask or as a follow-up. I hope the information was clear. Charlotte, anything from you? Any feedback or suggestions?
Well, I just wanted to say thank you, Monika, because the last year that we've spent together with the coaching sessions have been fabulous. I've learned so much, and like you mentioned, we're still in contact. And now and again, I ask you a question, and, and you're right there to answer. So it's very much appreciated. And I've actually created some of my own Google Forms now. So and using the website through Google, using the spreadsheets, using the Google Drive to share and collaborate. It's been amazing, the change and how much more we can get done together by collaborating through this. And just for anyone that's left, I'll just mention that we looked at using Google Drive and we looked at using OneDrive because as a school board, OneDrive is supported through our board and Google Drive isn't necessarily supported through IT. It's not unsupported, but it's not supported. So we actually now sometimes use both. So now I can use OneDrive and I can use Google Drive because they are very similar. So I'm really glad to have that information and learning, always learning, but it's been a great year. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I learned so much from you as well. And sometimes we assume things and think something is going to be great and work great. And that lesson about, the implementation and change can take time. I think that's something that I have to learn as well. I get excited about technology and I want to use it all right away, forgetting that our instructors are working within systems and have limited time and resources. So it was also a really good lesson for me to be able to understand better of the constraints sometimes and the difficulties that can come up. And even with the technology, right? With the school board, we had some lessons about how things can be not allowed, restricted, or blocked, and then we were able to address some of them, not all of them. But it's a lesson as well to understand that we work with specific environments, and sometimes it's not as easy as it seems.
Absolutely.
I appreciate that. Okay, so I'm going to turn off the recording.